cosmopolitanism. And here writes, Benhabib questions a limiting conception of cosmopolitan rights, saying that they're not necessarily dispensations from states. Rather, they are the legitimate and inalienable political victories of individual and collective agents who claim that in the public sphere, and through interactions, iterations, and democratic strategies, gain is not dispensation, is not a gift from the state, is claims that people brought before states, and through argumentations, political articulations, social movements, they're then guaranteed. And this is very important. She starts in this process by acknowledging the important concept of concrete others. We normally talk about immigrants in general, aliens, foreigners, refugees, asylum seekers, and all kinds of categories for that. And they're very, what she calls generalized other. They are concrete others. This became very, very clear recently in the discussion about the Syrian refugees when they saw a baby, a little boy that has a name, has an identity. So who are those who are crossing borders? Who are those who are claiming rights? Who are those who deserve to be protected by human rights? According to her, we need to start acknowledging them first as being concrete others. But she also expands the framework even more to say in the books, got the books here, Another Cosmopolitanism and The Right of Others, where she talks about the problem of bounded communities, or bounded communities, and say that they fail to enlarge the scope of what counts as human. So the first strategy should dehumanize those who are trying to come in, to say they're not human enough to deserve the rights that the state is granting. Another dimension here is precisely the critique of the state-centric approach. Why is the state the one that has this reservoir or the prerogative of granting rights and defining who is a citizen? In light of this problem, she identifies what I call the disaggregation of citizenship, showing there are different kinds of citizenship, different forms of belonging, and very concrete cases involving various waves of immigrations in Europe to the United States, and they're considered in different ways. In the United States, for instance, you see this coming from the Irish, and then later the Germans, and Mexican Americans, Polish, and you see there are similarities in how those waves of immigrants are received, are welcomed, and what kind of prejudice are projected onto them as well, for Catholics, Muslims, and so on. So she goes on to say that the focus on the humanity of those who are crossing borders is the most important point that we need to consider, and see how humanity remains despite the fact that it is being expressed in a dislocated context. And we should not allow for those who are moving in and out of borders to be victims of discriminations, especially due to their gender or religious identity. And this is made very clear in the way she analyzes the fate or the situation of Muslim women wearing scarf in France and Germany. Born the term iteration from Derrida, Benhabib shows that when those discriminated individuals, women with identity, insist on affirming their identity, their contingencies, their claims, their culture, as they did, those Muslim girls and teachers in Europe did, they exercise what she calls democratic iterations that expand the meaning of rights, claims, and promote the growth of the political authorship by ordinary individuals. And thus they extend the rights of immigrants that are often considered outsides. So in other words, they come to places where they're not considered welcome, such as France and Germany, but by claiming, by participating in social movements, by affirming their rights, by claiming their rights, they get what they want, so to speak. So democratic iteration is a communicative process of raising claims, reiterating them. You don't get it just by saying it once. You have to repeat it, insist, and make them visible and audible so that change may eventually happen. So in a certain way, a critical theory needs to guarantee that we create those spaces where it is okay, it is your right to come and bring your claims and to claim your rights. Now, based on all this, several things I've learned and I'd like to share with you as I conclude is that as you try to address the global challenge, the variety, global south, global north, the tradition of critical theory is trying to address those challenges as they evolve and as they change. Maybe one thing we could do is to start questioning and understanding the importance of certain concepts that normally frame the way we see things. One of the concepts is the concept of territoriality. Ben Habib in The Rights of Others, for example, she starts by talking about that. The concept of territoriality, we normally use that in order to frame the migration of people, their status as either permanent residents, illegal documents, temporary visitors, and so on. And also to define how states deal with immigration, along with other issues such as the cultures and values that immigrants and border crossers bring. For Ben Habib, territoriality is an archaic idea that has been progressively changed due to globalization. And for centuries, people have migrated into different locations. But with the acceleration we see in the globalization processes, the number of people and the reasons for their mobility in and out of different states has changed. But we still have that idea of territoriality that's bounded them to a certain strict category that no longer holds and has lost its explanatory power. For example, we're fine with traders or business people going in and out. If you are, we were discussing the other day, yesterday maybe, if you're from Cuba but you play good baseball, you're in. If you play soccer and you're going to Germany and you're from Cote d'Ivoire, you're in. No, if you're a tourist and you're bringing money, you're in. So you see, there are some cases that are permissible, some cases are not. If you're a student, many of us, I'm in. As a professor, so, but it seems that those decisions are very arbitrary, and the concept of territoriality doesn't shed any light on how decisions are made about who is in, who is out, who belongs here, who doesn't. Another concept is the concept of sovereignty, especially because it is traditionally tied to this view of territoriality. When we talk about sovereignty, mainly we understand it territorial sovereignty, that a state has under its jurisdiction a particular space, a particular location. And this is related to human rights and immigration because we see an intensive migration of cultures, traditions, beliefs, and norms, and the claim that all this should be regulated by an authority bound to a particular jurisdiction that is also related to a particular space. And in contrast with those that defend, or to those that defend the territorial sovereignty, Ben Habib again suggests that we could have porous borders. Borders that are fluctuating, they are changing, and that guarantee that people are afforded their human rights to come in and out of different communities without depriving them of their nationality and citizenship. In other words, you can even keep your other religious, ethnic, even national identities, and you still have the right to come in and out based on those porous borders that relativize the importance of territoriality and territorial sovereignty. Now, the critique of territorial sovereignty also invariably leads to another concept that we need to highlight, the idea of popular sovereignty. As you know, this comes from Rousseau, and the idea that sovereignty is based not so much on the territory, but the people, the democratic will of the people. The problem, though, is what do we mean by people? Or popular. Today, the claims against immigrants, the claims against refugees, the claims against asylum seekers is also made indirectly in the name of popular sovereignty. They say the people want so. And that's something that the United States is going to be decided pretty soon, what the people really want. But again, the idea that people being those who pledge allegiance to certain values, who are bound to a certain territory, who accept the sovereignty of a particular state, and so all that's typed in such a way, but who defines what the people is? Who defines the sovereignty of the people? I think we need to go back to Rousseau. In Germany, Frau Maus, Ingeborg Maus, has insisted on that concept of sovereignty in a more Republican understanding of the term. And I think for us, in terms of a critical theory, trying to develop, to catch up with all those challenges I mentioned that are the global north and the global south, we need to define what do we mean by people. Is that folkish? Is that popular? Is that what the people there say? I think we need to have a more robust understanding of this. Two more, and then I'll be finishing. Another concept is citizenship. What does citizenship mean? If national identity is questioned as a sole ground for for citizenship, then it is a process of political membership beyond borders that ought to define who is the bearer of rights. For Ben Hadid, for example, in a democratic process, the authors of laws and participants in political process are legitimized and exercising both political authority and political rights. So that's the her critique of the state-centric approach to law and rights. As an example, she mentioned the case of immigrants, again, Muslim women in France and Germany, who were discriminating for crossing borders and maintaining their cultural identity. If you come here, you should give up your cultural identity. And why? Who legitimizes this kind of requirement? In her view, they were able to translate their moral claims into legal rights by means of what you call democratic iterations, and simply insisted on affirming their rights, their universal rights, to affirm, in virtue of their humanity, the possibility of affirm their culture and participate actively in the continuous building of a democratic society, even if it's in a different location. Finally, we also have another problem, another concept we have to wrestle with, which is the idea of patriotism. This is another concept that ought to be questioned, has been questioned. Of course, Martha Nussbaum and Habermas and others have proposed here the idea of constitutional patriotism, where you focus on precisely the result of those iterations, the result of the rights claim, the results of the framework you establish as part of the democratic community. That's what you pledge allegiance to constitutional rights, to that framework that guarantees your own possibility of claiming your humanity and the universality of rights. Well, finally, as I said at the beginning, I think the very concept of immigration needs to be questioned if we want to catch up in terms of theoretical development of the critical theory with the challenges that are being presented to us today. And here's a summary of what I tried to do today. First, I told you about there's a series of discussions on immigration philosophy, the ethics of immigration today. And my first claim is that we also have a tradition of critique and critical theory that if you go back 300 years, is being trying to address particular issues, this dialect as I was talking, that observes the challenges of the day and try to develop a framework to respond to those challenges. So this means that if you're espousing, if you're defending, if you're promoting a critical theory of human rights today, we need to make sure that we're responding to the real challenges. And they're global. So critical theory must be global. And so we cannot continue on focusing one particular example and then generalizing it. No, we should take the general perspective of what's going on and then involve in a multidisciplinary effort, as we have at High Norm, different people from different perspectives trying to tackle that big global issue. Secondly, I also said that this tradition is being evolving, and that Ben Habib presents a very interesting framework, maybe the most interesting, more multicultural, open, gender cognizant perspective on this issue. And many traditional concepts, she points out, prevent us from addressing those human rights challenges we have today, the immigration challenge we have today, asylum seekers, refugees, and so on. And with this, I come to my conclusion. The very fact that we get mixed up, we get lost, we get confused about the terms is another obstacle, another barrier we have to observe. Are we talking about immigrants? Are we talking about legal residents? Are we talking about illegal residents? Are we talking about refugees? Are we talking about asylum seekers? Are we talking about tourists? Are we talking about business people? There's a confusion here we don't know. There's specific claims in each one of those cases. And some can come in. Others can never come. Others come in and out under certain conditions. So in the end, I say, yes, the very term immigration bill, I'm sorry, we work on this together. The title of the conference is immigration, but maybe that doesn't lead us very far. Maybe the idea of border crossing. They're all border crossers. But then we're going to specify what kind of border crosser you are. I think we have had our international experience. We defend our human rights. But there are some of the border crossers who cannot have their rights presented to the public sphere, cannot have their rights respected, because we lack the conceptual context, the conceptual machinery to better understand their fate. So my hope is that at the end of this conference, we might develop some new tools to be able to understand better the situation at the global level and thus upgrade our theory so that we can better respond to the challenges of today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amos. Why don't you just take questions from the audience?
All right. Yes, Michael?
Okay, I want to reassert the importance of territory and citizenship, and for that matter, the word immigration, which strikes me as fine so long as you do some footnoting. And the reason is that for me, there's a conceptual link between human rights and violence. I go back to Einstein's attitude towards the U.S. on this. Now, Einstein famously said, I think of the United States as an insurance scheme. If someone tries to do violence to me, the U.S., through its law, will do violence to them. He didn't love the U.S. the way you love a partner or a pet. He was like, feelings, who cares, man? Patriotism is crap. They'll shoot at people for me, and that's awesome. Now, the interesting thing for me is that those relationships seem still, in our world, to be local and partial. When the UN was founded, we anticipated they would have a transnational army, and that never happened, and it probably never will. Instead, violence is still very much a state creation, at least violence that is responsive to normative considerations of the kind we're talking about. And that means that, to me, you still have to ask the fundamental question, who has a right to have their rights protected through violence? Now, if someone in Mexico City gets punched today, and they call up the Southern District of New York and say, vindicate my claims, they'll get hung up on, and they should be hung up on. That would be inappropriate, and it would also undermine the very task of political self-government. And for that matter, if I go to, say, some of our friends in Frankfurt and say, I want to vote in the German elections, and they say, but you're not German, and they say, but I feel German. And you know what? I love the German Constitution. In some ways, I think it's much more like what I would have written than the American Constitution. I'm like, man, go German Constitution. I love you guys. I'm voting. They say, well, look, you're not a part of that set of people that are currently organizing their lives through our laws, our coercive means of defending your rights. Look, totally different discussion as to what counts as German enough in terms of integration. Multiculturalism, fine. We can reallocate what has to be in place to be a good citizen. The point is, you're not a citizen at all. And that, to me, says that there's still a role for arbitrary borders because those are the limits of enormously important creations, namely states that are responsive to and protective of particular individuals. This is why I think Arendt is better than Benavide, because Arendt had it right. You have a right to have rights, and that means you have a right to a particular relationship with someone who's going to shoot at bad people. So when we disaggregate to like transnational institutions and say citizenship and immigration, it's all just a mass of border crossings. To me, it still isn't. It's a matter of where do you go that they're obligated to shoot at bad people for you.
Good. Well, if Einstein were saying something today, he would probably be talking about to one of those people, maybe in the Mexican border. They're the ones who are shooting, and they're not state. So today, as you know, even electoral law and rights here in the United States today, there's a possibility that some folks will be bearing arms to guarantee that the election is not rigged, right? So in other words, today we have more actors than just the state, and some of them are exercising extrajudicial killings. You see this not only here. You hear what's happening in the Philippines with Duterte. Just say, look, if you see, if you think someone is a drug dealer, just go ahead and kill, and I'll protect you as a state, right? So I would say, as the Germans say, ja und nein. Yes, you have a point, but if you look, there's some counterexamples to that as well. Not only the state is claiming to have the authority to shoot people, to enforce the law, but there are some other non-state actors that are acting on their own behalf, or on behalf of parties and other subnational structures, parties, businesses, and for good as well. There are some other subnational structures, non-governmental organizations beyond and below the state that are taking initiatives of protecting immigrants. You know, in the United States during the Reagan years, there's the famous sanctuary movement, where some churches decided, look, if you, very similar to something we see in Europe in the medieval times, if you enter this space, it's a sacred space, the police doesn't come here, and there is no law against that, but the police respect it. Now, no, we can't do this. There's a change. So in other words, there's some more dynamics there than just a state-individual relationship. I think there's some more things happening there that that picture doesn't capture. Of course, you could say, yeah, but in the end, the legitimacy. Now, that's a different question. That the legitimacy of the use of violence, the monopoly of violence, as they translate in some other countries, belongs only to the state. Yes, but yesterday Adam was presenting an interesting distinction that I considered. Are we talking about the state or a certain government with a certain ideology? Are we talking about, so even when we talk about the state, we conflate state with government. And as you know, when governments change, different policies, different ways of enforcing the law emerge. So again, right there's something we need to be careful to differentiate analytically. So I don't think sometimes, not always, the state has the monopoly of violence. Sometimes the government has. And the state is, for example, in the case of the United States, the army has questioned, especially during the Bush years in Iraq, many military, including generals, have questioned their own government and say, look, based on conscience, based on human rights, which are supranational, I'm not going to do this. We have many, I don't need to provide the examples. And finally, sorry for taking too long, I was going to say something I forgot. Oh yes, that there are states that fail. Luckily the United States, no, even if the United States is failing to many of its citizens in many cases, but of course, if you're in Uganda today, and if you're in Zambia, and you happen to be homosexual, you're done. The state you're a citizen. So in other words, there's no guarantee that because you're a citizen, the state will protect you. The states have used violence against its own citizens as well. So there's no. So I don't have the answer, but I'm trying to say that we need to provide some more qualification and analytical differentiations for that. Yes, back there. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I also wanted to raise a question about your discussion of territoriality from a different perspective. So you talk about territoriality as an archaic idea. I was wondering how you reconcile that view with indigenous and Native American claims to sovereignty that's kind of based on a very robust understanding, notion of territoriality. So are those kind of exceptions to your rule, or do they also fall under the scope of your analysis?
Great question, great question. I never thought about that, so let me give me 1 second here to collect my thoughts. That's true. At the same time, there's also a history of, in many traditions, civilizations, a history of immigration. I'm using the word I don't like, but or diaspora, if you will, where, for example, in the case of the Navajo in the United States, they've had different locations as reference, right? So there's a certain essentialist claim about which land is your land, because the environment is continuously changing, right? When I say continuously, I'm talking about matters of centuries, and for cultures that have are gathering or hunting, they go where food is. So if we have a drought here in collapse, Jared Diamond shows about some civilizations that disappeared because they failed. They're so bound to their space that when there was a drought, and all the resources, water, fish, the trees and the environment they needed disappeared, well, normally they've moved away from there, and those who did so survived. Famous examples, the Easter Island and others where that didn't happen. So yeah, I would use that as my answer. That do they really need to be bound to a particular space, or let's go under that discourse and see, are they talking about resources necessary for our livelihood? Maybe that's what they mean. I don't know. It's an open discussion. I'd like to. Then yeah, here and then we go 1, 2.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this great paper. I have a question concerning popular sovereignty. And recent polls have shown that in Europe, with the exception of Germany and Spain, a majority of the European peoples are against any further immigration. So if you take seriously popular sovereignty of those countries, then the question comes up, so what does that mean or would mean for a global critical theory approach that at the same time adores popular sovereignty? And then that would, as a result, mean that there should be no further immigration, right? If you take that seriously. So there's this obvious tension, or can be this obvious tension between popular sovereignty and global right, the movement. So
Great.
would you say then popular sovereignty trumps, or are there any, would you say there are moral principles or free movement of citizens that have moral or whatever priority or even legal priority? What would you say?
Great, thank you. This question also helps me to remember the point I was going to tell Michael that I forgot. In certain places like Switzerland, even in California, even if you're a foreigner, but you live in that neighborhood, so at that level you can vote. So in certain things, that's no brainer, no problem there. So it's not inconceivable to think that certain rights, like you pay, that's one of the arguments people bring when discussing immigrants nowadays here in the United States. No, if you pay taxes, if you're a law-abiding, you can say citizen person, right? In a certain way, you also have rights. So I think what Ben Habib is saying, and that's why the word citizenship becomes complicated, is that if you have a certain commitment to that community, independent of that being your place of birth, independent of that being your place of citizenship, you can exercise your rights, you can affirm your rights up to a certain point. Of course, part of the problem is that the idea of citizenship we're talking about is kind of 200 plus years old. It's still, of course, very much influenced by the Westphalian idea, but remember, even the Westphalia, the state was now connected to a religion, who use regio, use religia. So if I'm a Catholic in a Protestant area, I can change. In other words, now it's something portable. Your religious identity is something more portable that you can bring and affirm. So even though you're not necessarily part of that community, the fact that you're a Catholic would grant you particular rights elsewhere. Of course, you're being exposed here from this particular place. Today, we see some things like that. For example, in the policy, and I'm trying to respond and learn at the same time, but for example, in response to the Syrian refugees here in the United States, some people have claimed only Christians, which if they're Christians, we'll accept. But I'm not saying that this is correct, and I'm not defending that idea. I'm just saying that you can grant rights on different grounds. At least this is the practice. Now, how we can make that legitimate is another question. That's for us to discuss. But I do see the possibility of popular and the people being not only those who are we traditionally consider citizens, but those who are active in the community. In my own experiences, as an immigrant to several countries, I remember in Germany. I was in Germany. Look at me. I'm not German. I remember one day I went to buy beer, and but I was living in the same place the same community for 4 or 5 years. I thought I had money, and the lady said, "You don't worry. You're part of the community. You come back. Next week you can take your beer, pay next week." In other words, I felt so good because I could have my beer, not pay for it. But the idea that I was being considered part of the community. So in other words, there are different ways of being considered the people of a particular community. And that's not a full answer, but I think it indicates some possibilities of people. And a second point I should say quickly, we're talking about the tyranny of the majority, the rule of the majority rule. That's one possibility among many others. But I think if we localize, make it more community bound, and those are the people who participate in the city councils, and in front of them, the people react in a different way. Part of the problem that people think about this, about certain people this way and this way, because they don't know them. It's a caricature of the alien, a caricature of the refugee, and so on. Once you have the personal connection, or a part of a community, I think that also changes. So anyway, attempts at answering is not a full sophisticated yes.
Amos, I have a question. It's a little bit from left field, but you and I have had this conversation, so I dare ask it. What is the relationship between the emergence of ideas of cosmopolitanism and human rights and energy? I mean, we have the emergence of ideas of enlightenment at the same time as we have the steam engines, 1784. We have the abolition of slavery in this country at a point of time where we no longer need slave labor because we have machines.
Yeah.
So how do you theorize energy and access to energy into that, in that whole conversation?
That's a great point. Of course, we have Andreas has been working on this, Dara Willendorf, I think also, I'm not sure how much other folks are Steve Gardner is doing on that, but the idea that today the biggest challenge is going to be the climate refugees, right? So, and we see already happening in the Pacific Islands, and we see this happening in Africa. A great number of the folks who are leaving this particular place and going elsewhere is due to environmental. So yeah, I would say it's fundamental. That kind of relates to Amy's question, because if we go back centuries in different civilizations, what prompts people to move from one place to another mainly are environmental reasons. So that's the point I was trying to make to her as well. That people, and that kind of relativizes the whole idea of territoriality, because actually more than territory, I think the environmental security is more important than the territory. That's why they moved, for example, if you look at the history of the United States, different folks from the famous Trail of Tears, we moved Native Americans from here, where they have resources, to the desert, where there's no so even those forced migrations that happen in this country and elsewhere were definitely, as you said, and that's part of one of the things I'd like to explore further. They're environmentally induced immigration, because in the end, I think more fundamental than the space and location is the availability of natural resources. And of course, today there's high mobility in that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, that's another question. It has to do with the bioregionalism, biopolitics, and all that. But today, it's not necessarily that you plant, but you need to have the availability, access to energy, food, water, and so on. So a lot of the flux in immigration will depend on that. Does that help? We'll keep talking.
Yeah.
Amos, thank you for your wonderful talk. And it was really precise introduction into very different fields of problems we are have to focus on in order to try to think about solutions. And I come back to the very important first question of territoriality as a principle of state sovereignty. I wouldn't, and this is in the line of Sheila bin Habib's reflection I want to make the suggestion of interpretation of that relation. Territoriality defines state sovereignty by space definition. But what is defined? Is it the proprietor's right of a state controlling something, like in the private law tradition? Or is it, according to something like a public law tradition, not only just a relation by which original rights emerge, but a relationship of responsibility? The state claiming this territorial identity in the name of sovereignty, has to take over a certain kind of responsibility for something happening to people, like security and others. But responsibility is something you can question whether or not state authority is willing to act accordingly. And if not, you could probably claim something as a subject who is somehow related to that task of the state, vis-à-vis a broader auditorium than just these state authorities, namely on the global level, the authority of the world community or other authorities. I would say this kind of transnational or even cosmopolitan level of political responsibility in front of which single states have to act and to answer what they claim in the name of sovereignty. Sovereignty and territoriality in that sense wouldn't be interpreted any longer as something like fundamental or absolute, but relative in the name of that duty to be responsible for something, and if you fail to act according this primary responsibility, somebody else could step in or could raise questions, and that would allow to give this relation of territoriality and sovereignty a much more dynamic and political frame and understanding, and opens up to something like a level of political structure of jurisdiction, probably, on the level beyond the state territorial relationship.
Thank you. Well, you said a couple of terms called my attention here. One is when you use the word responsibility and relational. And I wonder if responsibility can be relational more than territorial. First, if you look at the dialect of my dance here, right, the facts, and then the reflection, the facts. As a matter of fact, today, the idea of territorial sovereignty is being questioned on many grounds as being effectively, you watch on TV today, someone invading Pakistan, the drones attacking a particular citizen. Israel does that, the United States does that, many other countries do that. So they do not respect anymore what we call the territorial sovereignty of it. We know that. They enter into domestic affairs. Today in the United States, some of the students already left, but maybe interesting for them. The big discussion, one of the big discussions in an electoral season is, Russia is interfering in the election, right? So even though, and that has nothing to do with the territorial sovereignty. I mean, so there is a cyber relationship that affects the political process. There's a perception point. They're trying to influence, according to intelligence community, they're trying to influence the process, and that's they're affecting the domestic policies locally here. But you also have other cases, such as, again, referring to the United States, people asking if they could bring Saudi Arabia to court. And the U.S. government concerned about that because this means that some other folks can bring the U.S. to court in different fora. And if you look in terms of business practices, it already happens. And again, it's relational, not territorial. If your business, in terms of private law, in terms of the contract, if you agree, you and I'm Brazilian, you're German, but we agree that New York's going to be the jurisdiction for to address any conflicts in our contract. New York is a jurisdiction, and this is already happening in many cases. I just need to have some kind of residency, in which, for business purposes, because of this, it's easier for a business to come in and out. We're done, and so let's go back to the facts. This is already happening. So my concern is more the theory here. Is that good or bad? Can we justify that or not? What are the norms that are guiding this particular practice. Of course, was a convenience for the United States to go to Pakistan, go to other places without a previous agreement with the sovereign. But now what's happened is that the opposite is becoming possible as well, and sometimes it happens. So that's one thing. Now, about the relational part. So I think today we have many other forms of relationship. And that brings me to, for example, I think I mentioned the other day, like example of the ius sanguinis and ius solis. Of course, ius sanguinis is a figure of right, of law, that say, well, I don't care about where you are in terms of spatiality, in terms of location. If your mother is Jew, you're Jew. You know, if your father is German, you're German. You're born in Paraguay. You know? So there are some previous models of right in citizenship and that allow for that. And of course, then you have the case of the United States, which they're trying to question right now, ius solis. If you're born in the United States, even if your parents were, to use the term they use, illegal immigrants, you're an American citizen, right? Now there's some folks that are trying to say, no, we should change that. There's a big discussion, and they want to bring that eventually to the different strategies to bring that to the Supreme Court and even have an amendment, right? So, in other words, I'm saying there's a lot of movement here in the fact part of the reflection, where something's already happened that question completely the territorial sovereignty. And my biggest concern, that's again following Ingeborg Maus. I have the ghost of Carl Schmitt here, and the whole idea of the space being the fundamental value in terms of defining sovereignty. I think sovereignty is the will of the people. And going back to what you had asked, okay, who is the people? That's the question then. Well, I think people are not necessarily those who are born in this particular place, but people are those who participate in the community. Another question, okay, what counts as legitimate participation in the community? Okay, well, some cases, as the examples I gave, for example, in Switzerland, California, they even allow you to vote if you're paying your taxes, you're law-abiding, and those kinds. So there are possibilities of considering sovereignty in those terms. Well, we don't have time for discussion here. I'm getting it. 1, 2, go ahead. Yeah.
Go to the break. I have in a way a complementary question to the question Regina asked, and especially also the way you replied, and kind of, I guess also a question on kind of how far and how long you go along with Sheila Ben Habib. Because, I mean, Regina asked the question in a way kind of, who is the people and who can decide who can come in or cannot come in? And you in a way replied, kind of giving this kind of, I think, the rest neo-Aristotelianism in Ben Habib defending kind of if there is commitment, and if people really want to become part of the community, they should be getting in there. I mean, we live in a highly unjust world, kind of with huge disparities in income and well-being and so on. So much of the migration taking place today is not that people would want to live. I mean, the people who lived in this camp in Calais, I mean, they didn't want to become British citizens. I mean, they wanted to go to Britain because kind of its economy was much more was working better, at least until now, than the French economy. And we know that in the mid-2000s, people want to come to France because then the French economy was doing better. So much of the kind of border crossing that is taking place today is, in fact, kind of people are not really committed to the community. They want to get a better life. They want to be protected. They want to make use of institutional structures and so on. So here I'm wondering, kind of, is this then an exclusionary reason? So people say, kind of, if people are not really committed, if they only want to earn kind of more, if they only want to get kind of certain rights that are there, then kind of states can just close their borders and say, no, you're not really committed, so you cannot come in.
Good question. Well, responding more intuitively, again, all those are suggestions for further discussion for the work, but I'll say yes, in principle, I think that's legitimate because, of course, we still have to negotiate what counts as legitimate participation in the community, contribution to the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we could have different tools to address that issue. For example, seasonal work. or conditional entrance, participation, and that's what some people sometimes affirm. That's part of the problem, because we have this strict binaries, either yes or no. But you could say, okay, look, we're here in a very provisional way for a certain time, wait for the war in your country. So I think there's a possibility of creating those conditions. And actually there's a history, in different countries we have labor law that provides for seasonal workers who come to a certain time, then we go back, and that makes complete sense also, because it would guarantee labor rights. Because, for example, what happens when those things are not in place is that we have human trafficking for labor, for cheap labor, where those who are being trafficked don't have any rights. You see, for example, in the Philippines, that's they're importing all kinds of folks. They jam them in a building, there's no water. Saudi Arabia is becoming famous for this kind of stuff. They don't pay the workers the same they would pay Saudi Arabian. Well, the Saudi Arabians don't want to work for construction in those emerging cities, so they bring thousands of people. They put in the middle of the desert. There, you go. You live in quarters where you have 12, 20 people in one small room. A bus takes you there, come back. You can't complain. They keep your passport. I think if you had that condition established in terms of international law, we do. We just don't enforce it. That will be an alternative. Look, you're here. And your commitment is not sufficient to grant you this particular right. You have this other right. You have labor rights, of course, all the human rights. You can suppose, look, and say, for another reason I can't come and be persecuted in my country. Well, that's taken care of. The provisions of the Human Rights Declaration say that, you have the right for political asylum. Does that respond?
You have access, in the Geneva Convention it says you have the right to have access to citizenship.
Yes, exactly.
Just because you have been persecuted.
Yeah.
Not because you have a commitment to the country you would want
exactly. And that's fine with me. That's one of the conditions that they're
No, just because, no, I don't think you said this. Because in the Geneva Convention it says, if you have quite a credible fear of persecution and you come to a country that is protecting you, this country has to offer you a path to citizenship.
Yeah.
No other conditions attached.
That's right. Okay, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have no further reflection that I'll think about it. I'll get back to you later.
I want to take this territoriality question kind of flip it around. So now, the focus of your talk and the focus of most reflections on immigration generally seem to be the dispossessed moving to somewhere better. But there's also the reverse, right? You can have people with lots of money, lots of economic power moving to the global south because I want to live on that beach and build myself a golf course.
Happens every day.
Yes. So, wouldn't that be a legitimate reason to close borders, but say, no, you cannot come in, because by you moving here, you're going to further dispossess the people already living here. You're going to increase property value, for example, and make it so the people living there can't afford rent, or that sort of thing. So,
great question. Yeah. Again, those things happen every day. The question I'm concerned is how do we reflect upon those facts and consider them legitimate or not, right, just, etc. Many countries, many communities that accept that kind of folks, they use certain norms to justify that. The norms, they say, okay, this will create new jobs. They'll be paying taxes. So they have all kinds of positive values, so to speak, to justify this fact. Or this will allow us to promote that neighborhood and the benefits that this person will bring for their house. That this means will bring pavement and water to that particular. An example was very interesting. During the World Cup, last one in Brazil, the German team decided to go practically in the middle of the jungle. And they did exactly this. A business person came and built this resort and all that, and kind of donated or told the German team, hey, you can You can use it, and also marketing thing also. And of course, if the German team is there, then all the Germans will try to come and spend some time in an island or whatever it was. It was an island, really hard to get there. But the team ended up becoming friends with the tribe nearby. Brazilians don't care about that tribe. They don't even know they exist and all that. But there's this whole thing, so much that in the middle of the games, they learn a dance. I don't know if you watch the games, and so they learn a dance from that tribe and dance when they won and all kinds of stuff, because they had, and then they left and their money they won the World Cup, right? Did they? No, not this time. No, they won Brazil. That's right. But the fact they had got some money, and they said, no, this money should go to the tribe. So that example, I think, provides shows that it is possible for that to happen and be sort of justification, the euphemism. And they thought they were promoting that community. They're promoting their rights. They gave an ambulance and all
It
that.
seems completely contingent, though, whether the German players will be friends with those people or not. Maybe
That's true.
go back to the jungle.
That's true. If I were the mayor, I would say, well, I want to know what's your justification for all the stuff we're doing. So that's the point. Just give money, yeah. It's not, but normally it's a moral justification for the actions we're taking. So I think we could build a chain of reasons that connect the moral justification with the more juridical thinking and political action that allows for us to avoid that kind of manipulation of power based on the economic conditions.
Okay, let's thank Amos.
Thank you.
So we now have a 15-minute break.